Also, in relation to the budget, what indications do you think are important for regional planning, and how can these be assisted by a clearer indication to each region? When it comes to the reform, how are you going to include cohesion in this reform that you are suggesting for the RRF? And can you also confirm that cohesion will not be a part of this binding approach to the RRF plans? Thank you.
Confermo.
I can confirm. Now, it is hard, of course, to commit here and now precisely what type of a procedure we will take from here on out. When it comes to cohesion policy, we need, of course, to have the strengthening that within the next MFF, but that is why we need to work together. I sat on the other side of this table and spoke very much with commissioners asking these very questions in the previous legislative term. And I believe that together, and this is what I stated in my introductory remarks and referred to this, I think that together we need to begin to work to share our priorities and to address the issues of simplification, to strengthen the role of local and regional autonomy, and to give a targeted approach to the needs of the regions. This is a decisive point. The issue of reforms, yes, is a part of a European strategy, but it is also part of a national strategy, and I think many subjects when it comes to public services, issues related to education, the need to update, incentivize the regional approach. And I think of the complexity of our regions in Europe. There is a need to have this ability, this commitment to the regions is fundamental. I believe that yes, of course, I'm going to take a commitment here and now with you, but I think certainly we will need to do this together.
Mrs. Aphrodite Latinopoulou from the part of Patriots for Europe. Dear Mr. Fito, welcome. I wish you every success. Coming from Greece, I have seen firsthand the disparities that have been going on for decades. And despite that fact, these disparities have subsisted between Eastern and Western Europe. A lot of communities, rural communities, are seeing their population and their economies shrink. What are you going to do in order to avoid this social and political polarization between the cities and the regions? How do you think that our regions can give the opportunities to the young so that they will stay at home?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I think this subject has to be looked at considering the wider context of the demographic challenge in the islands, in the outermost regions, in the countryside regions. There's a problem of a rural exodus. We need tailor-made policies in this area. They've got a double role here. First of all, we need to be improving growth and investment in these areas, but we also need to ensure that they are tailor-made genuinely so that they can reinforce the rights of the young people who are growing up in those areas so that they can stay where they are, the right to remain. Enrico Letta, in his report, gave some very precise guidance. Mrs. von der Leyen's guidelines as well.
English, English, anglais, anglais, anglais. En doublon, c'est bon ou pas? Non, c'est bon? C'est bon? Une seule voix, tu m'entends? Ok. Écoutez, les gars, on me dit que...
Well, our technical staff is letting us know that the issue with interpretation is solved. I think we have already exhausted all the accidents and situations that can delay. Again, apologies for this bumpy start, but I'm sure that the rest of the meeting will be running very, very smoothly with your cooperation. Having introduced you, the members, the co-chairs from the Hungarian Parliament, I would now give the floor to Mr. Kosák for the welcoming remarks. Mr. Kosák, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the mishap. Please consider it as an austerity package by the European Parliament. One interpreter translating all the texts. You cannot understand it, but it's cheap. Thank you for accepting our invitation. This is the 15th such meeting. I am the chair of the Committee on Defense and Law Enforcement. So we have the special situation in Hungary whereby the same parliamentary committee is responsible for defense and law enforcement, in other words, the work of the police. Now, we have not prepared for this, but history has its way with us. International developments render this a very topical and important meeting. The outcome of the US presidential election make it crystal clear that the US presidential election will have an impact on migration, if we are to believe President-elect Trump, who promised to stop illegal migration. So he's not going to manage or put a brake on migration. He wants to stop it. And he also said that he will start mass deportation of illegal migrants from the US. So he's not going to legalize it. He's not trying to find a place for them. He is going to deport them en masse. So we have to be prepared for this situation, namely that the migratory pressure on Hungary will increase together with the security problems and tasks that we have to resolve, because Europe will be the only continent where it will still be possible to get your migrants in. So we have to be prepared for the situation. It is one of our basic tasks and duties is to look after the security of European citizens and get ready for this very predictable turn of events. So I wish you a good meeting, and I pass the floor on to Mr. Vajkely.
Let me also welcome you at the 15th meeting of the Europol JPSG. Thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us. My name is Mr. Vajkely, and I am the chair of the Justice Committee of the Hungarian Parliament.
I will now report on the outcome of the Troika meeting. The Presidential Troika approved the draft agenda of this 15th JPSG meeting. As regards the appointment of the Consultative Forum, due to the limited number of candidacies received and following the call for expression of interest, the Presidential Troika has decided to postpone this item to the next meeting of the JPSG and to relaunch the call for expression of interest in memberships of the JPSG Consultative Forum. We have taken note of the 6 candidacies already received following the call. These 6 individuals and organizations will not be required to apply again, and the exact terms of this renewed call for expression of interest will be agreed by the Troika via written procedure. Our common goal remains the setting up of an effective and balanced consultative forum without unduly delaying the process. So we have agreed that greater efforts will be made in raising the visibility of this second call for expressions of interest. The Troika meeting continued with the presentation of the future priorities of the upcoming Polish presidency of the Council with regard to the work of this group. And the Troika noted that no letters were received from delegations and that 3 sets of oral questions were submitted to Europol. Finally, the date of the next Troika meeting was communicated. It will take place in February 2025. I would like to inform you that the JPSG was invited to participate in the meeting of the Europol Management Board that was held on the 18th of June 2024 in Brussels. A written report following the meeting of the Europol Management Board has been uploaded to IPEX, the website for Interparliamentary EU Information Exchange. The next Europol Management Board meeting, to which the JPSG will be invited, will take place on the 10th and 11th of December in Budapest, in Hungary. So we will now turn to the adoption of our agenda. Our meeting, as you know, is dedicated to the scrutiny of Europol. We will consider its work over recent months and its planning for the years 2025 to 2027. This will be followed by a discussion with the EDPS. We will also hear from Europol's Data Protection Officer and Fundamental Rights Officer. And furthermore, we will discuss the impact of the war in Ukraine on the area of security. Our meeting will be concluded with 2 scrutiny sessions. The first panel on the need to prevent security threats like the Solingen attack through addressing illegal migration, and a second panel on the fight against cybercrime, in particular crimes using artificial intelligence. So, colleagues and JPSG delegates, do you agree with this draft agenda? As I don't see objections, the agenda is adopted. And I will now continue with the next item on your agenda, which I've already referred to, which is the appointment of the members of the Consultative Forum on Fundamental Rights. The Consultative Forum assists the JPSG upon request by providing it with independent advice in fundamental rights matters. The JPSG determined the composition of the Consultative Forum and its working methods with an amendment to the JPSG Rules of Procedure, which was adopted on the 19th of February 2024, our meeting in Ghent. And pursuant to this addendum, on the 24th of June, the JPSG launched a call for expression of interest for individuals and organizations As you know, 6 candidacies were received, but following my explanation, and as earlier stated, the Troika has decided to postpone the decision on the appointment of the members of the JPSG Consultative Forum and relaunch the call for expressions of interest in due course. So we will therefore move immediately on to the next item, and I will be passing the floor to Mr. Kossak to continue with our new item in our agenda.
Thank you very much. Nagyon szépen köszönöm. Thank you very much. Dear delegates, members, I'd like to inform you that Ms. Ylva Johansson has sent us a video message. She could not be here personally. Is the interpretation okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to inform you that Ms. Ylva Johansson cannot be here with us. She has sent us a video message, which is coming up now.
Good morning, everybody. I spoke to you for the first time nearly 5 years ago. And back then, we in Europe underestimated the threat posed by organized crime. We were maybe a bit naive, but this is no longer the case. And in large part, that thanks to Europol. Thanks to Europol's flagship SOCTA report that 3 years ago so loudly rang the alarm bell about organized crime. And thanks to Europol's recent mapping of more than 800 most dangerous criminal networks that shows the violence, danger, and corruption they bring to our societies. The last 5 years, I was able to do a lot to boost the fight against organized crime, a lot more than I dared dream when I started 5 years ago. A new EU law on asset recovery to take away crooked cash from the criminals, new anti-corruption rules to criminalize all forms of corruption in all member states. And it's now urgent for the Council and European Parliament to approve this law. And I put in place many new laws and initiatives to improve police cooperation and information exchange, because it takes a network to fight a network. But most importantly, I put in place a new mandate for Europol, with more powers, more money, and more staff to fight crime, and more powers of oversight for you, the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group. Europol is the bedrock of European police cooperation. Europol gives not only vital European coordination and information exchange, but also European scale, with support for forensics, operational analysis, technology, innovation, support vital to all member states and indispensable to smaller member states who do not have the capacity or the means. Without Europol, it would be impossible to fight organized crime. Europol's support was crucial in massively successful operations like Encrochat and Sky ECC. And day in, day out, Europol supports member states' police action against traffickers of drugs, of guns, and of people, against cybercrime, against child sexual abuse, and against terrorism. Europol helps member states to use their new powers under the Terrorist Content Online regulation to remove terrorist propaganda within the hour. Thanks to the new mandate, it's clear Europol can process big data, without which modern police investigations would be impossible. Thanks to the new mandate, Europol can now directly process data from private parties, and that's essential. To fight financial crimes, you need to work with banks. To fight digital crimes, you need to work with internet companies. Europol is also at the heart of my latest initiatives to fight crime. This year, together with Europol, we launched the European Ports Alliance. Europe's ports joining forces to keep criminals and drugs out of our harbors. And now the European Ports Alliance is fully operational. And as first ever Home Affairs Commissioner, I went to Latin America, to Ecuador, Colombia, and most recently Brazil. We have just concluded negotiations on the new EU-Brazil agreement that will allow Europol and the Brazil Federal Police to work even closer together and exchange personal data. A game changer for fighting organized crime and drug trafficking across the Atlantic. And we are working on similar agreements with Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, and Mexico, in addition to the agreements we have with Colombia and now with Brazil. And I want to give Europol a still stronger role in the fight against migrant smuggling. That's why I proposed a new law last year for stronger coordination with member states and agencies, for operational actions and investigations, with more money and resources for Europol. I could give many more examples, but it's clear. Europol is the foundation of our security against cross-border threats. And I'm so glad that in the new mandate, Europol will have an even stronger role to play. In her political guidelines, President von der Leyen proposes to make Europol a truly operational police agency, with more than double the staff over time, with a stronger mandate and also stronger oversight. This will no longer be my task. I will be leaving soon. It will be the task of the new Commission, and it will be your task, because a stronger role for Europol also means a stronger role for you, the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group. I wish you a lot of success in carrying out this important task, the most important task there is, keeping our citizens safe. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to introduce, on behalf of the Hungarian presidency of the European Union, representing the government of Hungary, Deputy Minister Mr. Bence Rétvári, and welcome him to the JPSG. Mr. Rétvári will now deliver a keynote speech.
Köszöntök én is mindenkit. Nagyon örülök, hogy...
I would also like to welcome everybody. I am happy to be here on behalf of the presidency of the Council, representing Hungary, the government of Hungary.
Egy pillanat. Akár többször is nagyon szívesen köszönöm.
I am happy to welcome you again, as many times as you want. So let me welcome you again and again at today's meeting. I hope it works. It should be working. So again, for a third time, let me welcome you here at this meeting on behalf of the Hungarian presidency of the Council. And I would like to briefly deliver an opening speech.
Megpróbálom folytatni, és akkor reméljük mindenki hallja és érti.
I hope everybody has managed to find the right channel. Their headphones and interpretation should be working fine.
Mindenkit. Mi itt Európában.
So, welcome you for the fourth time on behalf of the presidency of the Council. We have always been proud that Europe offered prosperity and peace to everybody in this continent. And this is where Europol comes in. It plays a very important role, just as national law enforcement agencies, because we all strive to keep Europe the safest and most prosperous continent in the world. If you look around in the globe, there is not another continent where people have enjoyed the kind of security that we do here in Europe. This is a very important value that we should do our best to maintain, and the EU should assist the member states to preserve and maintain the security we have. However, in the last 10 years, unprecedented challenges to Europe's security have appeared. First and foremost, illegal migration, which is a double challenge. Firstly, because of the illegal migrants, and secondly, because this is a new source of income for organized crime. If you look at this at an annual basis, proceeds from illegal trafficking amount to billions of euros, which can finance other illegal activities. So organized crime has found a new source of income. that's why we have to find new resources to be able to protect people from terrorism, from organized crime. Due to the billions in income of human traffickers, illegal and organized crime is in a better financial condition than ever before. That is why international cooperation is so important, and that is why Europol has such an important role to play. I would like to thank the colleagues at Europol because they provide assistance to the national police forces. The coordination, the exchange of information is essential, but national law enforcement agencies should be in focus because they are in the first line of defense and they are the first and foremost responsible for restoring peace and security in the cities of Europe. The 2021-25 period is coming to an end. And then the next working program is we are working on the next working program in the Council. The security situation in Europe has changed a lot. We have to protect the external borders of Europe. We have to be prepared for all the illegal migrants and criminals, and we have to, of course, deport the criminals that are already here in Europe. So we have a huge task to do. Hopefully today's meeting is going to prepare us for this task. Thank you once again for the word, and once again I am grateful to everybody working at Europol because they are doing a great job day after day. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen, Rétvári úr.
Thank you, Mr. Rétvári, for this speech, and I give the floor back to the co-chair.
Thank you. Now, dear colleagues, we move to the next item of our agenda. So it's my pleasure now to welcome now Mrs. Catherine de Boll, the Executive Director of Europol, and Mr. Peter de Brusser, who is the Chair of the Europol Management Board. Mrs. de Boll and Mr. de Brusser will report on Europol activities from March to November 2024 and present the draft multi-annual programming document 2025-2027. And they will also reply to written contributions by delegates. Be informed that we have only received a written contribution regarding the draft multi-annual programming by Mrs. Mertens, colleague of ours, MEP. And before I give the floor to our speakers, I will briefly explain delegates how they can submit requests for the floor for the subsequent exchange of views. Members of national parliaments wishing to intervene are kindly requested to fill in the speaking cards placed at their seat and hand them over to the ushers, who will transfer them to the podium. And members of the European Parliament wishing to intervene should raise their hand as during ordinary committee meetings. The speakers list will be created on the basis of the speaking cards and MEPs' requests, and the floor will be given alternately to two members of national parliaments and one member of the European Parliament until the list of speakers is exhausted. The session will be organized according to the so-called ping-pong formula, so there will be one answer, and immediately after the question, and immediately after there will be the answer by the speakers. After a bumpy start, I am afraid I will need to be rather strict and to set the speaking time. So please keep your questions to a maximum of 2 minutes, and the aim is to ensure that all parliamentary chambers have the opportunity to participate in this debate. And if time allows, and that is quite unlikely, we may then have the opportunity for further questions at the end. So, Mrs. de Boll, the floor is yours for up to 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the European Parliament, distinguished members of national parliaments of the European Union, Mr. Zazalejos, Mr. Koza, Mr. Veiki, and it's a great pleasure to us to meet you today for this 15th meeting of the JPSG. It is the first meeting after the European elections, and I would like to welcome the new Libe delegation. I will use these introductory remarks to update you on the strategic and operational developments at Europol, including the multi-annual programming document 2025-2027. As mentioned in the previous meeting, the Europol Management Board adopted the new Europol strategy, Delivering Security in Partnership in 2023. The renewed Europol strategy is embedded in the multi-annual programming document 25-27, which was transmitted to the JPSG in January, and as part of an extensive implementation roadmap of the strategy, which will guide our work until 2027, we have achieved progress in different areas. Last month, the Management Board agreed on our new External Relations Strategy 2025. We will also discuss soon the cooperation with private parties, and we are preparing a proposal for Europol's closer engagement with Schengen-associated countries. EU policy and legislative developments play an important part in the development of new Europol initiatives, and among those, the implementation of the Digital Services Act, the Directive on Information Exchange, and various interoperability components are already having significant impact on the work of Europol. Let me give you a few examples. The work on interoperability will continue in view of the start of ETIAS operations in 2025 and Visa Information System in 2026. In 2026, we will aim to establish a second external data center outside our headquarters, and the Firearms Intelligence Hub at Europol is being developed to expand our intelligence picture on illegal weapon trafficking, while the European Counter-Terrorist Centre will intensify its efforts on the implementation of the Digital Services Act. Related to the European Data Protection Supervisor, the interaction with the EDPS has been positive for the start of the year, with a positive feedback received early March 2024 concerning our implementation of recommendations of annual inspections that the EDPS addressed to the chairperson of the Europol Management Board. 83% of the 166 recommendations for annual inspections up to 2021 are implemented, and we are addressing the 33 recommendations from the last two annual inspections from 22 and 23, for which we received the inspection report in July 2024. Although still several recommendations remain to be implemented, especially those requiring technical adjustments, we are on the good way. Europol also had a constructive discussion with the EDPS on forms of data processing, in which Europol is in an innovative and forerunner position. Examples are the processing of personal data in the context of joint operational analysis cases, and an open discussion on the legal concept is important to combine full data protection compliance with operational and technical effectiveness. In order to get the implementation right, it is important to have a thorough consideration upfront, accompanied by the design of well-considered and adequately protective processes and tools. We have arrived at an advanced stage of preparation of the technical environment for joint operational analysis cases, which is currently subject to prior consultation of the EDPS, and also the sandbox for the protected and confined processing of personal data for research and innovation has been prepared according to the similarly thorough approach for operational deployment as of early 2025. Let me provide you now with a brief overview of Europol's external relations. We continue to concentrate on the EU neighbourhood, the Western Balkans in particular, and the countries of the Eastern Partnership. Support to Ukraine remains a key priority. My colleague, Mr. Rikouf, will provide you with a specific update. The UK is a primary partner as well, and we are also reflecting on how to increase cooperation with the Schengen-associated countries. The MENA region remains high on the agenda despite the significant gap determined by the lack of a legal framework for structured information exchange. We observe some encouraging developments with these countries. Latin America remains a priority region. We have established numerous working arrangements with Latin American countries that facilitate strategic cooperation with the region over the past few years. Europol continues to support the European Commission in its negotiations on internal agreements between the European Union and certain Latin American countries to allow the exchange of personal data with those countries. On this note, we are very pleased that the negotiations with Brazil concluded by initialing of the draft international agreement and the multilateral and strategic level at a multinational and strategic level, Europol will pursue engagement via Ameripol. Let me now provide you on an update on our operational work. In April, we finalized the most detailed study on criminal networks ever undertaken in the European law enforcement community. Our report, Decoding the Criminal Networks Active in the EU, describes in detail how the most threatening criminal networks are organized, which criminal activities they engage in, and how and where they operate. The report singles out 821 criminal networks involving more than 25,000 members. Illicit drug market remains the largest criminal market. Half of the contributed networks are active in drug trafficking. For 36% of the networks, drug trafficking is the main activity. The most threatening criminal networks are agile, they are resilient, and they are able to adapt swiftly to circumstances. They are borderless, they operate in multiple countries and are composed of multiple nationalities. They are controlling, they focus on one main crime area and they exert end-to-end control over it, and they are destructive. They inflict damage to citizens' lives through physical violence or financial harm. They infiltrate legal businesses. They affect our democracies and the rule of law, for example, through corruption. This report challenges also at least 3 of the trends that we observed previously. Polycriminality is an exception. So this means that the groups are becoming more and more specialized. Crime as a service, that means outsourcing of certain activities to other groups, is not as extended as we thought, but it is limited to very specialized tasks, such as document counterfeiting or complex online cyber frauds. And over 80% of the networks, their leaders, reside in the country of the criminal activity. Only in 6% of the cases, the leaders are outside the EU, mainly to escape actions from law enforcement authorities. This report, which will be updated every 2 years, has already triggered an increased sharing of information among member states' competent authorities. Europol also keeps monitoring the potential impact of developments in the Middle East on the migrant smuggling landscape. Balkan and Mediterranean routes remain important transit routes for migrant smugglers. We continue to deploy staff and guest officers to member states and third countries. And among the most recent operational examples, on the 19th of September, Europol supported an action day carried out in the framework of the Regional Operational Task Force based in Sofia, resulting in the arrest of 8 suspected gang members involved in smuggling activities from Turkey across Bulgaria, Serbia, up to the western of Europe. Timely exchange of information and enhanced cooperation with key third countries of origin and transit are a key priority. Financial investigations are crucial in undermining the economic foundations of criminal networks, and these networks, they generate staggering profits, estimated at up to €6 billion annually. The cost of smuggling services varies depending on the routes and on the type of facilitation that is provided. Investigations have revealed that these services can cost as much as €20,000 per individual. This underscores the urgency in implementing stronger measures to combat these exploitative practices. We look forward to the reinforcement of Europol's capability in this area through the proposal from the European Commission. Let me now give you some updates on economic and financial crime. One of the main novelties is the creation of the new Sanctions Target Group within the European Financial and Economic Crime Centre, which aims at progressively building up further capacities in the area of the circumvention of sanctions. Europol should be required to provide support in this area in line with the upcoming revised mandate of Europol. Regarding threats in this area, underground banking is rapidly growing as a methodology used for money laundering and terrorist financing. In 2023, Europol estimated that around 30% of the criminal networks operating in the EU engage with professional money laundering networks and/or underground banking systems. The threat and the risk posed by any kind of online scam campaigns linked to money laundering also remains high, and fraud represents a crime area in Europol with the most contributions received from member states and third parties. A few remarks also in the area of counterterrorism. Europol has been supporting EU member states and third parties in mitigating the multi-layered threats that arise from the escalation of violence in the Middle East. Europol has already coordinated significant referral actions related to terrorist content online. Also, the European Counterterrorism Centre is coordinating a dedicated working group looking into the topic of financing of Hamas by EU-based individuals and organizations. Europol is looking into including irregular actions of terrorist nature planned or orchestrated by various state and non-state actors who use hybrid methods and tactics. And we did held the 11th Terrorist Identification Task Force in the first week of October. When it comes to cybercrime, Europol continues to improve its operational strategies. Fight against ransomware is one of Europol's key activities, and in this respect, let me pinpoint one major operation. On the 20th of March, law enforcement took down the world's largest ransomware group, Logbit. The operation was led by the UK's National Crime Agency, coordinated and supported by Europol. Follow-up actions are still ongoing, involving more than 10 core countries. Victim support was a key part of this operation. I would like to conclude with some remarks on the future of the agency. Europol welcomes very much the proposals on Europol in the political guidelines for the next European Commission, as expressed by President von der Leyen and reiterated in the new Commissioner Brunner's mission letter. We will be ready to support the new Commission and the Parliament in reflecting on the future of Europol, making it an agency able to truly step up its operational impact and boost its added value for the Member States. I take the opportunity to outline some key challenges that Europol is facing. First of all, on access to data and technological developments. Coping with the digital transformation will require a quantum leap for law enforcement agencies in terms of maximizing the opportunities of relevant technologies. We need a digital agenda for law enforcement. AI allows law enforcement to provide more targeted and efficient support and consequently improve security. AI can act as a technical filter to select only the most relevant data for investigative purposes. Lawful access to data, together with the ability to manage and to analyze large and complex data sets, are essential for policing. We need a clear, upgraded and up-to-date legal framework to efficiently investigate crime. Technology firms, private sector, have become key non-state actors that are fundamentally shaping the world of internal security and the fight against crime. Private companies must therefore ensure their platforms are not safe havens for criminals by providing mechanisms for lawful access to data under judicial oversight. Cooperation with tech companies is essential, requiring the development of frameworks that balance security and lawful access without weakening encryption or cybersecurity. Second, we must further reinforce Europol external relations to achieve enhanced criminal information exchange and international police cooperation in an increasingly complex and globalized criminal landscape. All these changes cannot be implemented without the necessary human and financial resources. In a context of growing internal security threats, it is clear that Europol will be facing serious difficulties to fulfill its role in the EU security architecture if it is not provided with adequate, sustainable and stable resources. We thank President von der Leyen for envisaging a substantial increase of Europol's resources, both financial and human, in the new term. I would like to draw attention to the need of increasing resources in the upcoming annual budgets and, in a longer and more structured perspective, address existing resourcing gaps in the future MFF 2028-2034. I would like to reiterate my gratitude to the European Parliament for its consistent support in this regard. As a last remark, I would like to thank Commissioner Johansson for the excellent work done during her mandate. And I am looking forward to working with Commissioner-designate Brunner, who has set as a key priority for his mandate during his hearing last week his commitment in strengthening EU internal security. Europol stands ready to play its role. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. de Boer, for your presentation. And now I will pass the floor on to Mr. de Buescher for taking the floor and his presentation up to 10 minutes. Mr. de Buescher, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Distinguished members of national parliaments, European Parliament, and distinguished co-chairs, we value this opportunity to share with the JPSG the work performed by the board in discharging its oversight and decision-making functions and in guiding the agency towards full accountability, compliance, and a consistent and achievable planning in all areas. This meeting is also the last one I have the honor to address as chairperson of the management board, as the current 18-month period is turning to an end. The upcoming December MB meeting will elect its chairperson and deputy chairperson for the next 18-month period, commencing on the 1st of January 25. Since February, the Management Board has held 3 ordinary meetings in March, June and October, and the last meetings will be held in November, an online topical meeting aimed to adopt Europol's Work Programme 25, and in December, the last ordinary MB meeting. I will limit my report to the most salient points, as I bear in mind the extensive report just addressed by the Executive Director. As concerns strategic and corporate matters, the Board adopted the Europol Consolidated Annual Activity Report for 2023, which was transmitted to the JPSG on the 1st of July last. In its assessment, the Board praised the agency for its achievements in the first full year of implementation of the 2022 Europol amended regulation and for the preparatory or implementing activities performed in connection to other legislative developments of crucial importance, such as EU interoperability and the Digital Services Act. At its October meeting, the board endorsed the Europol 6-month report for 24, noting that Europol has made excellent progress in several areas of the work plan, often showing an increase compared to 2023 and exceeding the targets set for the first semester of 2024. The board appreciated Europol's efforts to keep absolute focus on its core operational work and took note that Europol's further planned activities in some areas remain conditional upon resource availability and especially the ICT area. The situation is likely to persist in 2025 unless appropriate resources may be allocated to Europol. I will come back to this point in a few minutes. Another point I would like to mention is the importance attached by the MB to the implementation of Europol's Environmental Vision 2030. On a regular basis, the agency reports on the progress achieved against its decarbonization targets. I want to inform you that also we as a management board are actively contributing to this vision by holding 2 meetings per year online and introducing the option for MB members to waive their need for simultaneous interpretation, thereby reducing travel needs for interpreters. Referring to the presentation of the Executive Director and its even greater relevance for the future, the board is fully supporting the agency in its commitment to developing innovative tools aimed to improve the efficiency of data processing for operational law enforcement purposes. In close connection to this, the MB has intensively discussed data protection-related matters and remains committed to keep doing this when necessary in cooperation and consultation with the European Data Protection Supervisor. I will not further elaborate on these matters since they will be discussed in the next session on today's agenda specifically devoted to data protection. Europol's external relations and partnerships has been a key agenda topic for all the 3 MB ordinary meetings already held this year. Following up the implementation of the new Europol strategy and the strategic goal to deliver security in partnership and further developing the relations with key partners for cross-border operational cooperation, the MB has quite been busy the past few months. An important achievement in this context has been the adoption in October of Europol's new external strategy, which the Executive Director of Europol has also made brief reference to in her presentation. The MB particularly welcomes Europol's new approach, which aims at intensifying cooperation with existing partners, targeting possible new partners based on complementarity and operational added value, and also at developing practical solutions for a more targeted operational and strategic cooperation, making full use of the new possibilities foreseen in the recast of the Europol regulation from 2022. I want to stress that the Management Board also ascertained that this new approach will be implemented in strict compliance with and in full respect of human rights, including data protection. The external strategy will be an integral part of the programming document 2527, which will be transmitted to the JPSG forthwith upon completion. Besides this new external strategy, designed to enhance partnerships with third countries and international organizations, the MB has also continued to be active in supporting Europol to seek further coordination with the other agencies active in the field of justice and home affairs. Besides the guidance of the MB in Europol's renewed engagement with Frontex on sharing operational information, following the EDPS opinion on Frontex side, a joint meeting on the 9th of October between the Management Board of Europol and the College of Eurojust has been held on the invitation of the latter. This meeting proved to be an excellent opportunity for an exchange of views on recent joint achievements of both agencies, such as the cooperation on war crimes regarding the situation in Ukraine, ongoing projects implementing recent changes in each other's legal framework, and possible avenues for future cooperation. Distinguished JPSG members, after reporting on past results, I would like to conclude my presentation by touching upon next Management Board's activities. First, the final programming document 25-27, including Europol's work programme 25, which the Management Board will examine and adopt by the end of November. During the February JPSG meeting, I commented extensively on the financial and human resources estimated by Europol to implement the activities planned for 2025. Europol's proposal was endorsed by the Management Board as it considered this to be necessary to secure Europol's ability to fulfill its core mandates in a context where the agency had been given important additional tasks, for instance in relation to EU interoperability, the new Information Exchange Directive and the Prüm II regulation, but also to implement other EU legislation in which no extra resources had been foreseen for Europol. In the meantime, the DNB is currently working on the basis and within the limits of a worst-case scenario, while the European Parliament and the Council are currently in the middle of a conciliation procedure. On behalf of the Board, I would like to reiterate our gratitude for the support provided by the European Parliament in its negotiation position, since it includes increased levels of financial and staff resources for Europol compared to the Commission budgetary proposal issued mid-June and on which basis the Management Board is working currently. Finally, I would like to echo what the Executive Director has referred to in her conclusions on the ambitions expressed towards Europol's future by President von der Leyen. While this also looks very promising as regards Europol's future resources, I think it remains nevertheless necessary in the meantime to make sure that Europol is able to fulfill its objectives with adequate resources as much as possible. Needless to say, the support of the JPSG members from the national parliaments and the European Parliament has been and will continue to be indispensable to the development of Europol, as well to its capacity to serve the operational needs of the national law enforcement authorities. Further, the next ordinary meeting of the Management Board will be held in Budapest on the 10th and 11th of December at the kind invitation of the Hungarian presidency and will be the last meeting for 2024. We very much look forward to welcoming the co-chairs of the JPSG at this meeting, which will take important steps in Europol planning for future years. Specifically, the Management Board will examine Europol's final budget for 2025 for adoption and will discuss the preliminary draft programming document for the period 26-28. I hope to conclude that my report has provided you with sufficient insight into the work carried out by the Management Board during the latest months and into its future activities, and I look forward to exchange views with you following this intervention. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. de Brucer. Thank you, Mrs. de Bol, for your presentation. I'm sure we'll feed a very fruitful Q&A time now. So before I give the floor to our first speaker, please, I would like to remind you to speak slowly and clearly so you can facilitate the work of our valued interpreters. And of course, you can ask specific questions to either Mrs. de Bol or Mr. de Brucer. Those questions addressed to Europol in general. It will be up for our speakers to decide which of them, either the Executive Director or the Chair of the Management Board, are best suited to answer. And now I give the floor to those who have put oral questions, starting with Mrs. Verena Martens, who is an MEP, a colleague of us in the European Parliament.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, dear Chair, and thank you, Mrs. de Bol and Mr. de Brucer, for your speech and the presentation. I have sent in various questions, but I would like to focus on the two that are most important for me now. How does Europol assess the current level of operational collaboration between member states? And what mechanisms are in place to address any inefficiency or bottleneck? And secondly, how is Europol planning exactly to improve communication and collaboration mechanisms with member states to ensure better operational outcomes? And to which extent is this very important increase planned? Thank you.
42 seconds. Well done, Mrs. Martens, for facilitating our work. Now, Europol has the floor. Mrs. De Boll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, indeed, we support the national law enforcement agencies. We work through the national unit. In the different member states, it's an autonomous decision by the different countries to design a national unit with whom we work. We offer tools that are at the disposal for the national law enforcement agencies in the member states, and we offer those tools as platforms for collaboration. We have a confidential exchange tool for information, such as the so-called Siena, the AIS, the EPE, the JOAC, etc. So these are all communication platforms which are offered to the national authorities, and it's up to the national authorities to see how they use them and how they make use of them, and whether or not local police forces can use the tools. We have tools for operational exchange, like Siena. We have tools for strategic and tactical exchange, like the Europol platform for experts, which is also very important, because to have a law enforcement community enlarged with experts from the academic world to give us better insights in how to do police work and to understand better victims and criminals is important. We encourage, of course, the national law enforcement authorities to work together with the local law enforcement authorities, because at Europol we see there is still a gap in information exchange when we look at what is happening at local level. We do not always have the relevant information. For instance, when we see that there is an increase of the use of FLACA drugs in some areas, we do not always receive this information. That is why we try to encourage the national level. We support the creation of Siena Connection for local police agencies on the field. We help to make sure that this is dispersed. And we have the decision on the involvement of local police is a national decision, so we can only encourage. Operations supported, we see that there is an increase in operations supported. By the end of quarter 3 2024, we supported already this year 2,700 operations, 1/3 related to terrorism. And in 2023, overall, we supported 1,555. So there is an increase. There is more trust, there is more confidence, but we can do better.
Thank you, Mrs. De Boll. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Urve Tidus from Estonia.
Thank you. Dear co-chairs, Madam Executive Director, colleagues, last time we were given information that the countries of the European Union are increasingly transforming from a market importing synthetic drugs and cocaine into a drug-producing region. In recent years, the media has also paid more attention to the spread of life-threatening synthetic opioids and the increase in the number of deaths caused by overdose. The spread of new substances poses a serious challenge both to the law enforcement authorities and to the healthcare sector of member states. In the light of the above, we are interested to know what specific steps Europol will take in the fight against drug production, and what are the specific models of cooperation that will be used with member states and their main cooperation partners to identify organized criminal groups involved in the production of synthetic drugs in Europe. And if possible, we would also like to know what technologies are implemented to prevent the supply and production of synthetic drugs on the EU market. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tidus.
Thank you. Thank you for the floor.
Yes, please.
Synthetic drugs are increasing and the opioid market is increasing. It's increasingly complex and it includes diverted medicines and synthetic opioids like methadone, fentanyl, tranquinitazine, Flakka, and so on. The business models used by the criminals are more sophisticated than ever. They combine sections of sea routes and land routes. They are using layers of companies and intermediaries to organize the shipments. Synthetic opioids are cheaper, they are more potent, and new substances are already detected every year through the EU early warning systems. In mid-October, a large-scale laboratory producing was dismantled in Latvia. It was a key site for synthetic drugs production in the European Union. Europol is investing again in material to assist member states in dismantling the REPs. What do? We have a drugs unit. We work in different areas to fight against drug trafficking. We try to increase seizures and arrests through the operational task force support and the high-value target focus. We are improving our tactical picture in order to provide better advice on how to tackle the criminal networks, and we are in closer cooperation with source countries, in particular South and Latin America. We work closely together with the Drugs Agency in the European Union. We did set up a drugs liaison task force. These are the drug specialists from the different countries coming together and discussing how to tackle drugs related to the monitoring of the situation in the EU. We have the European Port Alliance, which is very important, a cooperation with the private sector in this area, and we have to increase even further our cooperation with source countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. de Bol. As we have the same number of speakers from the European Parliament and from national parliaments, I will give the floor alternately one and one. So the next speaker would be Mr. Christian Vigenin, MEP.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bol, Mr. de Boucher, for your presentations. I have a comment on my region of EU based on your presentation as well. Given the geographic positioning of Bulgaria, Romania and Greece as the EU's external borders, these countries play a critical role in combating organized crime, human trafficking and drug trafficking, key points of Europol's strategy for 2025-2027. Therefore, I strongly believe that deepening the collaboration between Europol and national law enforcement authorities will significantly enhance our capacity. But another element, the 2025-27 programming document emphasizes Europol's holistic approach to addressing financial and economic crime through the European Financial and Economic Crime Center. Is the current exchange of information with the European prosecutors sufficient, and how can we strengthen the cooperation between the two institutions to more effectively safeguard the financial interests of the Union, since the number of convictions still falls short? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vigenin. Who is answering from Europol? Mrs. de Bol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have established good cooperation on operational and strategic level with EPPO. The operational cooperation is well established and we support EPPO cases, mostly in the field of MTIC and VAT fraud. We have a working arrangement between Europol and EPPO that entered into force in 2021, and EPPO is also connected to the secure communication line Siena. The close and trustful cooperation is also reflected in the fact that in addition to daily and weekly communication, we hold monthly meetings to discuss joint cases and requests and to coordinate the work. The third Europol-EPPO steering committee meeting took place in October, and EPPO participated at the 3 sessions of the Next Generation EU Law Enforcement Forum, and the forum was co-chaired by Italy and Europol. EPPO participates also in the European Europol-led Operation Sentinel, and Europol, Olaf and EPPO and Eurojust are the EU anti-fraud architecture. We are working together to protect the EU budget. Can we do more? Yes, we can do more together with EPPO. We have a request and a will from EPO to do more together with them. So I think when we look at the declaration of in the political guidelines of the President von der Leyen, we also have to reflect on this, how to support EPO better in the future and how to have an even closer operational cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. De Bol. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Milena Apostolaki from Greece. Please speak slowly, particularly if you read out your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to thank Mrs. De Bol and Mr. De Buscher for their thorough presentation. Well, AI provides tools against organized crime with special effectiveness in cybercrime, but meanwhile, cyber criminals also utilize the best of its potential, developing techniques which are often hardly traceable. So how Europol intends to carry out this difficult scope to confront the use of AI by cyber criminals and its networks, and is cooperation with tech companies helping in this scope as well? And secondly, Europol, as the competent entity of EU for law enforcement, has the duty during its operation to guarantee human rights protection. So, how you fulfill both compliance with your operational procedures and protection of human rights in an era which, amongst others, is marked by the threat of terrorism? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Apostolaki. Now, for Europol, Mrs. De Bol, 2 minutes.
Thank you for this question. The tools and the services based on AI and machine learning are becoming common for cyber criminals. Malicious large language models are frequently offered on both surface and the dark web. Cases of AI-assisted and AI-generated child sexual abuse material has been reported and are expected to escalate, and AI tools and deepfakes are refining fraudsters' social engineering capabilities. As law enforcement, we really need AI because AI relieves human analysts from repetitive tasks and facilitates efficient and prompt processing of vast amounts of data. And at Europol, AI systems support the work, but there is always a human who takes the decision on the use of the tools. We are now using 7 tools at Europol related to AI. We have the so-called project AP for AI related to fundamental rights, and this is creating an algorithmic automatic accountability mechanism that is designed to hold the people and institutions that design and deploy AI systems accountable to those affected by them. It's a concrete checklist, in fact, that can be used by law enforcement. Every tool we use, also AI tool, is data protection protected. We went to the EDPS to have the opinion. We have the chief AI officer who is responsible in the office to see that we do not use tools that are not compliant. And we have the AI committee to make sure that we have a good view on what are the tools that are used and for what are these tools used. And then we have the fundamental rights officer who is involved in the innovation lab for the development of the tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. De Bol. Now I give the floor to Mr. Mathieu Vallée, member of the European Parliament.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning to you, madam. I have 3 practical questions to put to you. The 2013, these joint police patrols for the cross-border checks. I'm thinking of Belgium and France. They've got these joint groups which can work to refuse temporal workers, for example. They can be working alongside the national police. They can't cross the borders, but they could change the laws and the rules on this.
in February 2024, there was an exchange of facial recognition, police registers, and digital things. These are done. Thank you. So today, the police services make their request by email, which is very long and is an additional administrative burden, which is very difficult for our people. So these women do agreements. Are they going to be set up very soon so that we can really have proper cooperation between these different forces so that they can help the work of our police forces? We know that the far left are more concerned about police control than the control of criminals. And finally, these bilateral cooperation agreements provide exchanges of knowledge, but also you have these practical efforts. And I do apologize for the speed.
Thank you. Mr. De Brucher.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Well, I want to add first, of course, that these joint police patrols between Belgium and France are based on a bilateral treaty, which is called the Traité of Tournai. It's the Treaty of Tournai, so it's a kind of bilateral cooperation which we have between Belgium and France, and which gives us indeed the possibility to organize joint police patrols. It means that we have to have the difference, or look at the difference between these European cooperation, which is broader, and the bilateral cooperation between neighboring countries. And of course, sometimes, like we have a cooperation between Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, which gives us a lot of possibilities of cross-border cooperation. Sometimes we call it the laboratorium for European cooperation. And we have the same kind of cooperation with France via the Traité of Tournai. Now, of course, this gives us broad possibilities. The legal basis is there to organize these kind of joint patrols. And of course, that these joint patrols have to be asked or requested from one country to another by email. Was that possible? But that surprises me, you know, because there are a lot of other possibilities for information exchange. Different member countries can also exchange between themselves via secure communications channels like Siena. So I think we have to motivate the countries to use this kind of secure communication channels also for the implementation of bilateral possibilities for police cooperation. I hope this answer is satisfying, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. De Brucher. And now the floor goes to Mr. Cohen-Metsu from Belgium. Mr. Metsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. De Bolle, Mr. De Buischer. I have two additional questions. Ms. De Bolle already spoke about crime as a service. Last week there was a joint investigation between Sweden and Europol, an investigation to see how youngsters are recruited through online platforms. The same danger or threat is also occurring in the Netherlands and in Belgium. So my question is, because they commit violent attacks, one, are there already lessons learned which Europol's director can share with us? And two, is this particularly related to the drug trafficking? My second question is about the EU ports, because many of the ports in the European Union they see that there is a drop in seizure of cocaine. Take, for instance, the port of Antwerp. The first half of 2023, there was a capture of 43 square tons. This was only the half this year with 22 metric tons. And the same details we see in the port of Rotterdam. Just to be sure, there in 2023, 28 metric tons were captured. This year, beginning of this year, only 16 metric tons were captured. So does this mean that the threat of cocaine trafficking is decreasing, or is there another explanation? Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. De Bolle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Related to youngsters, yes, the recruitment of youngsters by serious and organized crime networks is a real problem and expanded in the recent year. It's also the case in terrorism. The tactic is used by networks to avoid detection, capture and prosecution, and we see that in some countries they lower than the age for people to come before court, but then they even recruit more younger people. The recruitment methods are evolving and minors are more and more being tasked with violent acts such as extortion and killings. Minors are involved in over 70% of the criminal markets, including cyber and online fraud, drug trafficking and the related violent migrant smuggling and property crime. And online platforms and socials have become instrumental in the recruitment of minor people. And minors can receive up to 20,000 euros to commit violent crimes, so killings. When we then look at the latest trends in drug trafficking, over 50% of the EU's most threatening criminal networks are engaged in drug trafficking, and cocaine trafficking to the EU, but also the production of drugs by the networks continues to be a concern for the EU. The use of violence increased, and the use and the abuse of the legal business structures is very concerning. The changes you mentioned, the decreasing seizures in the ports, Colombia and Ecuador, they remain key source countries. We see a drop in seizures. The networks, for us, they try to circumvent controls in large parts of detection, and they adapt their way of working. So new modi operandi are detected. They have semi-submersibles that are crossing the Atlantic. Second, there is an increase of drop-ups. Scuba diver teams of both sides of the ocean are operating. Third, the incorporation of cocaine in other materials, and then we see that we have drugs extraction facilities in all of the European Union popping up, and the routes are changing, smaller ports are used.
Thank you, Mrs. De Bol. Now the floor goes to Madame Brigmont, MEP.
Thank you very much, Chair, and hello everyone, and welcome to the new colleagues also. The Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group is a joint scrutiny group from national parliaments and European Parliament in order to scrutinize the Europol agency and the EU police cooperation. I think it's important to remind it's not a conference nor a panel for the Hungarian presidency to spread its hatred against migrants, to better hide the real security threats in Europe, including corruption, but also proximity with Russia, for instance, and other security threats that have already been touched upon, like drug trafficking, but also environmental crime or the consequences of climate change. This being said, I go to my questions to Europol. The first one is related to the Eden Conference on Data Protection and Cybersecurity that was organized in cooperation with Europol and in its headquarters. It seems that a journalist and researchers was not allowed to participate, although he was registered. Who took that decision and why? Are there usual restriction rules for such kind of public conferences? My second question is a follow-up question on suspected conflict of interests of Europol staff cooperation with private company Thorn. The Ombudswoman investigation is ongoing, but what's the state of play on the rules concerning conflicts of interests in Europol? And why did Europol refuse access to documents on exchanges between the staff and the US-based foundation Thorn? And finally, you touched upon the increase of resources of the Europol agency. What are the plans for the fundamental rights officer that has few resources at its disposal for this? As he said, it's a one-man job. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Brigmont.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you,
Mrs. De Bol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Related to the Eden conference, our DPO will give the overview and the report on the Eden conference. The journalist did not declare he was a journalist, and it was ERA who took the decision, not Europol. Second, the question on the revolving doors and tone. In the Libe session of the 25th of October 23, we discussed about the Europol Code of Conduct that is published on the Europol website and that highlights everyone must prevent and avoid any potential conflict between their personal and work-related interests. Conflicts of interest declaration required by Europol staff when leaving the organizations are required beginning to end life cycle, so upon joining, while working at Europol and afterwards when leaving the organization, and staff must ask for authorization within 2 years after leaving. The Ombudsman inquiry was launched at the end of December 2023 and is still ongoing at the request of former MEP Breyer concerning a former Irish staff member who left in December 2021. He had the authorization without conditions to work for the NGO TON. A former Spanish staff member who left in 2022 April. Authorization was given without conditions to work within the Bank of Spain, Santander. New request received by Europol in December 23 to work as board member of Thorn. And Europol, but indeed, in the meantime, he stopped as board member. And Europol supports the Ombudsman, and the outcome of the investigation is expected for the end of fourth quarter of 2024. We do not make use of ex-staff to lobby on legislation, etc. Based on the public access request by a journalist, the following is highlighted. TON is an important non-profit private party stakeholder. Europol has regular contacts with TON in line with the agency's objectives and tasks. We do not use any AI or child sexual abuse material image classifiers developed by TON. There is also no cooperation with TON on the text sentiment classifiers for being used by Europol, and furthermore, an AI training program does not exist with TON on CSM material or any other subject. And Europol is not aware of the journalist allegation that the ADPS has concluded Europol officials had evaded documenting processing operations
Thank you.
For AI.
Thank you, Mrs. De Boll.
Thank you.
And now, as an exception, I will give the floor to Madame Keller, who has another engagement.
Merci.
Thank you very much indeed. Allow me to speak French. Thank you very much indeed to the chairs and Executive Director and President de Boucher. Just two questions overall from me on the strengthening of Europol. You, Executive Director and Chair, and President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said she will double the number of staff and strengthen the mandate. Can you elaborate what plans do you have for this growth, and how are you going to transform Europol into something truly operational, to quote her? Secondly, the new instruments and the previous mandate, there were a lot of legislative acts to strengthen police cooperation, new Europol mandate, a new mandate for exchange of information, DSA, the regulation on withdrawing terrorist content online. So how are you getting prepared for the implementation of these instruments? And perhaps you've talked about how you mobilize member states. How exactly is that going to happen? How are you going to face up to these major challenges? And what are the major challenges that you see for this agency? Thank you.
Merci, Madame Keller. Mrs. de Boucher. Mr. de Boucher.
Well, I think indeed when we are talking about the resources and the very ambitious challenges also based on the explanation or what the President von der Leyen says. I think, you know, when we are talking about the resources, that is clear that at a certain moment, given the many additional tasks that Europol is given, that on the budget we should see which actions we can prioritize and which actions we can deprioritize. And of course we said there are a lot of challenges because of the support we have to give to the member states on the information exchange, as already explained by the Executive Director, on the operational support, on the analysis capacities and so on. But there are also a lot of, and that worries the Management Board, there are a lot of new tasks which were given to the agency, and also a lot of new tasks which derive from new European legislation like Digital Services Act, the new Directive on Information Exchange and so on. So if we are talking about these resources, then I think it becomes very important in the ICT area, because we have to improve our Siena user experience, seeing these challenges on interoperability, seeing these challenges on the new information exchange directive. We have to see that we are ready for the interoperability with other European capabilities and Europol capabilities, improving interoperability, implementing the no-hit access to Europol data for EPO, for instance, Eurojust and OLAF and so on. These are really a kind of challenges to ensure that we are ready for the entry into operation also of the revised visa information system regulation, Europol's connection to use the Europol search portal, for instance. So I think these are all very important challenges, and maybe on the ICT area, also as Management Board, we've been informed that if there are no additional resources, that we should deprioritize some of these things in the ICT area. And of course, on the operational support, I think it's very important, and for the information exchange, and for the operational support to the Member State, that this has to stay on the same level as we are doing now, that this operational support keeps important. And if we combine this with the very ambitious ICT challenges we are facing, then it's really needed that we talk about these kind of additional resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. de Brucer. Please try to stick to the 2 minutes that have been assigned. And now the floor goes to Mr. Demetris Demetriou from Cyprus. Mr. Demetriou, the floor is yours.
Καλή σας μέρα και ευχαριστούμε για αυτή την αναλυτική ενημέρωση. Κυρία...
Thank you. I'd like to thank you again for that information. Mr. Bull, I'd like to thank Europol. They provide a very valuable contribution in the fight against crime. Now I've got a question for the officers which are present in Cyprus. They're playing a very important role. We would want to see their numbers increased because we're expecting additional problems due to the war in the Middle East. We would really want to avoid decreasing the numbers of officers. President van der Leyen has already made a declaration regarding the numbers. It's important to keep Europol operational and functional. Could you give us any details on these changes in staff numbers, etc.? These are, of course, decisions to be made by the Commission, but could you give us any details on that? And also, could you tell us anything about the methods and cooperation when it comes to data and how data would be used in the context of migration flows? Cyprus is a very particular case. Cyprus is an island, and well, almost half of it has been occupied since '74. And Turkey is using the occupied areas. We're seeing great problems due to this regarding the free parts of the islands when it comes to migration flows. So my question is, how can we counteract deep fake news? That's another one.
Europol μπορεί να συμβάλλει στην αντιμετώπιση των κυβερνοεπιθέσεων όταν πίσω από την επίθεση γίνεται χρήση τεχνητής νοημοσύνης.
Thank you, Mr. Demetriou.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Demetriou. For Europol, it would be Mrs. De Bol who will answer the question. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have 5 guest officers in Cyprus for now. We have an agreement with the Cyprus police on that. I discussed myself with the deputy police chief who was in The Hague a few weeks ago. Mr. Lecouf, my head of operations, is involved in the preparation exercise with the European Commission because indeed we have to recognize that there is a risk of migrations flow to see what needs to be done. We have also a dedicated staff member for the UFET extraction that is deployed recently in Greece, and we are monitoring on a permanent basis what is going on. So the guest officers, as you know, they are in second line. They are doing the security checks against the Europol databases, and then it is based on a referral by the competent authorities. The information exchange process is very important. It is people from Europol that are there, Frontex, the asylum agency and other member states, and the aim is to optimize the information flow and to try to have a harmonized approach related to the situation. Deepfakes, we see that deepfakes are exploding, including in the child sexual abuse area. It is a very difficult topic. At the moment, there is no magnific tool that can be used by the law enforcement community. The Innovation Lab is working on this with the Cybercrime Center, but it's a big challenge for the whole of the community.
Thank you, Mrs. De Bol. And now the floor goes to Mr. Maximos Charakopoulos from Greece.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε, ευχαριστώ για την ενημέρωση.
Thank you very much for that detailed information, President. I wanted to focus on migration flows because I know that this is also a priority for the Hungarian presidency. It's a very important point, even for countries such as Germany, for example. They've introduced very strict measures for frontline countries. And a lot of European institutions such as Schengen are at stake. Now we're concerned that there might be a backsliding or lack of progress. Migration and asylum need to be going in the right direction. This is the case, but we mustn't undermine this kind of progress. We're one of the first countries of entry. Turkey is one of our neighbors, and they're threatening the European Union by not implementing the agreement that was signed years ago. there's no possibility of returning asylum seekers to Turkey from Greece. We're currently seeing a great increase in migration flows. This is also tied in with the war in the Middle East. Mr. Boll, how could Europol react in a more adequate manner to illegal migration? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Charakopoulos. Mrs. De Boll.
Thank you. So we have at Europol the European Migrant Smuggling Center, and the center supports the member states in trafficking in human beings cases, and is also monitoring the situation when we talk about irregular migration. It's very important to receive actionable data from the member states, and we see that we do not receive enough actionable data at the moment. So for us, the migration package that is now presented by the European Commission will be key, because it will enhance the situation. It will enhance the situation and the cooperation between member states and Europol. Because it will so put the focus on exchange of actionable migration, having more operational task forces also in the migrant smuggling area and in trafficking in human beings. And we will be able, thanks to the information exchange, to support more and more member states in the area. We see that secondary movements are still very important, and all the routes in the EU remain important. The migration package will also be important for the cooperation with the third countries, and digital migration is also in the scope of the migration package. Related to Schengen, I would like to refer to my colleague from the Management Board.
Thank you, Mrs. De Boll. Signora Cinici. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr.
You want to add?
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Co-Chair. Yeah, very short. Of course, internal border controls in the Schengen area is of course, an autonomous decision of the member states. It's not quite clear in which way this can lead really to dismantling what is for Europol and for the member states important, dismantling criminal organizations who are busy with human smuggling. I know also that we have to invest in this logistical change of these human smugglers, and that's a very important issue, and we'll see what these results of this internal border controls can be in that regard. I can only say that you know that at several times there are Schengen evaluations for the different member countries to see how this Schengen regulation is implemented in the member states. Also, for instance, in the light of the Schengen information system, which is a very important tool for the police, and I can only say that Europol is also supporting the member states in these Schengen evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Signora Cinici, Caterina Cinici, prende la parola.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank Director Deval and for their presence here. We are all aware of the fact that Europol plays a key role in guaranteeing internal security of Europe and the different facets of organized crime, and they're operative with national police forces. Now, I want to focus my questions on crucial aspects, I think, about facing up to organized crime. And one concerns assets. Now, the first EU Europol study has highlighted money laundering, corruption, fraud, and so on as part of the large number of services offered to criminal rings. And they are in fact using the most modern technologies to do this. And now Ms. Boll has already said something about this, but I'd like to say, what about cooperation with the European Public Prosecutor's Office? Is there any leeway for making this more efficient in terms of its operations? And also, how does Europol, particularly the economic and financial services, how is it preparing to see the new rules on the confiscation and recovery of goods and ammo? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cooperation with EPO, as I explained, we do already a lot together. We have these meetings on different levels, but indeed we can do more. It's also the expectation from Madame Covesi. She wants more analysis in the different cases from us for all their data, and I think in the future we can reflect on dedicated teams at Europol to work together with EPO and the involved member states on the cases. As of the legal frameworks that are in the making, we try to adapt and we try to have more information exchange on financial and economic crime. That's why we also changed the setup of the Economic and Financial Crimes Center now to make sure that we have two divisions, economic crime and financial crime, and that we are becoming fully operational to support member states in this environment even more, because we understand from member states that from their side it is difficult to have the right people on board and also to have the right technical tools to investigate money laundering, corruption and fraud cases. We particularly welcome the fact that the EMLA regulation foresees a close cooperation with us, with Europol and this new authority, and we see the entire package in fact as an opportunity to do better and to a more comprehensive approach when we talk about financial crime in the European Union. The hit and no-hit system has also been in the regulation and will be implemented in Europol and in the new office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bol. Now I give the floor to Mrs. Oana Florea from Romania. Mrs. Florea.
Good morning, dear colleagues here. I have a question for Mrs. De Bol, and I will speak in Romanian. Thank you.
So, Madam Commissioner Designate on skills on Europol, and after the very good they're talking about a very good cooperation with the prosecutors. So in what areas will you have additional roles? And do you need, therefore, to have additional staff? And do you have a sufficient budget to be able to cope with this extra needs? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Florea.
So if I understand well, it's about the budget, the supplementary budget, and then the implementation of the budget in the area, in the agency. The supplementary budget for Europol will be used for a big part in the ICT sector, because for a few years now we have to deliver minimum viable products for our ICT development. So that is an area where we need to increase and to do more to keep pace with the recent developments. We also see that the new legislation for some new legal frameworks and for others we did receive or we did not receive a supplementary budget, and we had to do it with a budget that was already and resources that were already available. When I think of the Digital Services Act, for instance, we have a lot of in the implementation of the Article 18, a lot of threat to life content that is coming in out of the service hours. So we have to work on that with the budget that is in fact at the moment at our disposal. When we talk about crime areas, we believe that we have to work more and to do more in the envy crime environment. We see that in member states and at European level, we don't do enough yet. We also have to invest more in cybercrime, even more. And we also see that the forensic and the digital support we give to member states is not at the right level. So in that area, we need to do more. And then when I talk about also counterfeited goods, also in that area we see still gaps in the system to work on. We also need to build a second data center to be sure that we are that our data will always be at our disposal of the people. And we also need to increase our cybersecurity environment, because every organization at the moment is attacked by the digital challenges.
Thank you, Mrs. De Boll. Now I give the floor to Mr. Giuseppe Antocci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, Madam De Boll, and thank you for your excellent work. We have read very carefully what you have said about the active criminal networks. So I want to ask you, as an agency, how do you, or what are you doing to fight against this crime and to support member states in preventing infiltration of in organised crime into the legal economy? It's very important fact, because so many European funds are arriving through the Recovery Fund and they can go into the hands of these criminal gangs. We have looked at how the money is being spent. We have a fair share out, I think, of these funds, but we don't want these funds to end up in the hands of criminal gangs. So I'd like to know what kind of support the member states can expect from the agency in dealing with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Antocci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The infiltration in the legal business is in fact a key threat for the whole of the society. In 86% of the criminal networks that are known by us, criminal networks use the legal businesses, or they set up by themselves businesses to make abuse of these businesses, to launder their money or to infiltrate. Or they are already active over most of the criminal groups are busy already for more than 10 years, so they had already an opportunity to infiltrate in the legal businesses for a long time. They use the legal business structures to support, to hide and to facilitate the range of illegal activities they are involved in, and they launder, in fact, their proceeds. We see that a lot happens in the retail sector, that a lot happens in cash businesses, and also in the sector of the apartments and the housing. All types of serious and organized crime make use of this center. It is a priority for us that is taken on board by the Economic and Financial Crime Center. We focus on the high-value targets, the money launderers, and we go after them through the setup of operational task forces, so specialized peoples from the member states and from Europol working together. And we also work together with the private sector. We have the Europol's public-private partnership, so we work closely together with the banks to have a tactical setup, in fact, and to understand also from the banking sector where are the gaps in the system and where do we have to work on the gaps in the system.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. De Boll. Just a personal remark, because Europol is repeatedly warning about the infiltration of organized crime in legal economy. And I think that this is a major threat to our security, even if it is some kind of silent one. So thank you for your efforts in this field. Now the floor goes to Mr. Alexander van Hatten from the Senate of the Netherlands. Mr. van Hatten, floor is yours.
Dank u, voorzitter. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Mrs. De Bolle and Mr. De Buijsen
for their responses and to the Hungarian presidency for their efforts today. Now, first of all, I heard Mrs. de Bolle say a moment ago that we don't have sufficient information coming in order to get the smuggling centre at Europol to function well. I'm wondering what the causes are of the insufficiency of information. Is it the member state's fault or someone else's oversight? Can you amplify on that? Secondly, I heard in your presentation that you cooperate with Latin American countries, including Brazil. I'm intrigued to know how this is with the criminal underworld in the Latin American states, because, of course, that's a major influence on smuggling into, for example, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which has a part of its territory in Curaçao. So how do you deal with that? And finally, a question more about the execution, implementation. Lots of Dutch towns are currently grappling with attacks using cobras and other sorts of very heavy fireworks. These are happening in other European cities. I think of Antwerp. And I would like to know, is Europol paying any attention to this? Because there seems to be a conflict here going on. Drugs gangs are involved. Mexican cartels seem to be behind some of this. Are you paying attention to this at Europol? And to what extent will you be amplifying the efforts of national police?
Thank you, Mr. Van Hatten. Mrs. de Bolle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I talk about the EMSC and that we do not receive enough information, we do not receive enough actionable information. This means really information that we can use as in an operation, in a police operation. So there we can do more. We do not have enough information out of the source countries. We are very much focused in the European Union on the secondary movements, and we also have the problem in the European Union that legislation is different in different countries. So it's difficult sometimes to make arrests and to really to go after the complete line involved in migration. When I talk, for instance, about the English Channel, with the small boats, you have to go through the whole line upflow, and we don't do that enough. So in this area, we need to do more, and that is why I am very grateful for the proposal of the European Commission, because there we really have the focus on actionable information and more sharing of information in between the member states and Europol, and really the usage of the operational task forces that will be a possibility in the future. We have Latin America is extremely important for us. We have not so much information exchange on the part you mentioned. And when we talk about migration from the Caribbean, there is no such a big flow that we see coming as information towards Europol. When we talk then about fireworks, we helped France during the riots they faced during the summer of 2023. And some providers were in Benelux, also they were online. We supported investigations, but the challenge is in the regulation in the member states in a lot of cases.
Thank you. And now our last speaker on the list, who is Mrs. Malika Sorel from the European Parliament.
Je voudrais savoir s'il existe.
I wanted to know if there are any thoughts about drug consumers you might want to share, because it's all good and well to be after traffickers, but if we don't have any measures for consumers, we'll fail. I was surprised to hear Ms. Johnson say that the EU was aware of the extent of criminal networks only 3 years ago. Everyone working in this area has been aware of this for a long time. I'd also like to know whether you intend to look into sanctions against the countries of origin of illegal migration and drugs, also in the context of trade agreements. These countries of origin of drugs or migration clearly have no interest in cooperating because this provides them with profits. And then something that was repeatedly mentioned, but I didn't understand, was were you talking about criminal organized crime or mafias? Just wondering about that. Thank you, Ms. Sorrell.
Merci. On the consumers of drugs, it's more for the Drugs Enforcement Agency, excuse me. Consumers of drugs. It would be very interesting for us to understand who is consuming drugs, because if you understand who are the users, it will be more easy to go after the traffickers. But we do not have this study at Europol, but I think it would be very in everybody's advantage to have this study on the level of the drugs agency on EU level. When we talk about drugs, the last 3 years, we have enormous our insights in what is going on in the criminal network changed completely because of the big scale investigations we have managed together with the member states like Encrochatskaya CC, Amon, etc. And the investigations are still ongoing. I must say that before there was a lot of attention already for drugs for years, but when I arrived at Europol in 2018, there was no drugs unit anymore. So, and when I decided to start again with the drugs unit, because it was a request from all the member states in the European Union to focus again on drugs, some people did not see this as very attractive because it was a bit old style. Thanks to the new developments and the possibilities we have with the access we have to the communication of the criminal networks, we see how they work, we see who they are, we see how they communicate, and we see how they abuse the system. We are overwhelmed by drugs at the moment. We are overwhelmed by cocaine. We are overwhelmed by methamphetamines. There are a lot of precursors coming in from India and China, so we still have a lot of work to do. We work on the criminal networks behind, but we also do not have to be blind about state-sponsored activities in this area. But this is not in the mandate of Europol. When we talk about the EU Drugs Agency, we plan to have joint steering committee, and I think the issue of the consumers of drugs and the approach can be discussed also in there, and it's certainly a path to go. I also believe that the control of wastewater on member state level is extremely important to have a good view on the usage of drugs in our societies, because wastewater does not lie. We have a drop of the seizures in the ports, but the wastewater is still the same as before, so the usage is still there.
Thank you, Mrs. De Bol. As we have to make up for the delay at the beginning of the meeting, I will pass the hammer on to my colleague and co-chair, Mr. Bakey. But before I do that, and since this is the last JPSG meeting for Mr. De Bruycker, and on behalf of all delegates, I would like to thank him for his service as chair of the Europol Management Board and for the good cooperation with us. So take from us the acknowledgement and appreciation of your service as chair of the Management Board. Thank you. And I also would like to thank Executive Director De Bol and Chair De Bruycker for their for the thorough presentations and the answers. I think that this has been a particularly clarifying and useful session and exchange for the purposes of this joint parliamentary scrutiny group. And now I do pass on the hammer to Mr. Bakey for the next, as we move to the next item on our agenda related to data protection. Mr. Bakey, the hammer is yours.
Thank you. Kedves kollégák.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. So, we are not going to have a coffee break. We're going to soldier on and continue with the next point on the agenda, which is data protection. We have with us today Mr. Wojciech Biawiorowski from the European Data Protection Supervisor. We also have Mr. Daniel Durer, the Europol Data Protection Officer, and Mr. Olivier Burgersdijk, Senior Specialist at Europol. Let me extend a warm welcome to all of you. A few pieces of technical information that I need to share with you. All three of our speakers are going to have a maximum of 10 minutes to speak, and then we are going to open the floor to the JPSG delegates. Members of national parliaments who wish to intervene are kindly requested to fill in the speaking cards, which are placed at their seat, and please hand them over to the ushers, who will bring them to us at the podium. Members of the European Parliament wishing to speak should simply indicate so by raising their hand. I kindly ask you to limit your contributions to a maximum of 1 minute, so that all colleagues have the time. First and of all, Mr. Biawiorowski, I will give you the floor for 10 minutes maximum.
Thank you very much. Honourable members of Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group on Europol, esteemed national parliamentarians and members of the European Parliament, Chairman Zazalejos, Chairman Kosa, Chairman Vekay, Madame de Boll, Mr. de Boucher, the role of the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group is crucial to ensure that the agency, the Europol, operates within the legal frameworks established by the European Union while respecting the fundamental rights of our citizens at the same time. The purpose of the visit of the European Data Protection Supervisor at this forum is that we, fulfilling our supervisory task, complement and support the work of the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group. As you know very well, the European Data Protection Supervisor is an independent supervisory authority tasked with the responsibility to oversee the personal data processing in the European Union institutions, bodies and agencies, including Europol as one of the agencies, and to control its compliance with the EU data protection law. We discharge the supervisory function to the set of powers and means that the Union legislator entrusted us with. One of our duties is to report to the group on the issues relating to the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms of natural persons, and in particular to the protection of the personal data with regard to Europol activities. The knowledge that EDPS derives from the oversight of the Europol's personal data processing is a key resource at your disposal to better enforce democratic scrutiny and ensure accountability of the agency. Our experience in cooperating with the national data protection authorities, for instance, in the context of coordinated supervision committee, also adds value to the Europol oversight framework. The EDPS has the full supervision over Europol since May 2017, and our role, we progressively consolidated the close working relations with the agency, which we supervise with the impartiality, integrity, transparency and pragmatism, the values that we always implement in the supervisory function of EDPS. The EDPS first-hand understanding of Europol working methods and data processing environments enables embedding of the protection guarantees in the law enforcement practices. Indeed, Europol regularly seeks our expert advice on the matters concerning the processing of the personal data. The relevance of the EDPS supervisory activities vis-à-vis Europol is reflected in the findings of our most recent inspections reports, which focus on processing of PNR data, so passenger name record data, and access to this data, as well as on the data protection challenges raised by the processing of large-scale data sets. The changes in the regulatory framework governing Europol operations and expansion of the agency's tasks and responsibilities call for ever closer scrutiny and cooperation with the EDPS. And I'm here to discuss with you some of the focus areas that EDPS supervision of Europol in the last years was concentrated on, and which I expect to remain the focus in the upcoming years. These areas include the handling of the large-scale data sets, use of joint operational environments between the national police and the Europol, and the use of biometrics and artificial intelligence tools. I want to go more deeply into these topics with you to showcase why they deserve the special attention of EDPS work and how strategically we strategically approach our supervision in this regard. And let's start with a few topics connected with the handling of large data sets and the separation of bulk data from specific data, which is the part which already been discussed in the presentation by Madame de Boll. The basic idea of Europol regulation was that Europol should be processing the data on specific individuals who were clearly identified and categorized. That includes suspects, victims, witnesses, and other defined roles within criminal investigation, and the basic premise is that the persons should be known and labeled according to their role to be able to apply corresponding the legal restrictions and the law that the law provides. Though categorization, the aim was to allow for targeted data processing and avoid unnecessary intrusion in the privacy. Effectively, this is an implementation of the principle of minimization and purpose limitation. This resulted, as you know, in Annex 2 of the Europol regulation, which explicitly details the categories of the persons on whom the information can be processed, and it specifies not only who could be included in all these types of the permissible, but also the types of the data permissible for each of the categories. The data collection on suspects, for instance, is more permissible than collection of data for witnesses. The system was designed to maintain a strong grasp on what the data was being processed, to impose the degree of data management, and served as a safeguards against the over-collection of the data. I want to give another practical example of how the original idea close to data management is supposed to play out. Under the Europol regulation, Europol is obliged to report to EDPS on the processing of the personal data, especially concerning the sensitive categories. That includes data revealing political opinions, religious beliefs, sexual orientations, and other protected characteristics. For Europol to report meaningfully on such sensitive data, it must have in some way a more detailed knowledge of its data sets. This entails not just storing data, but understanding its contents and the origins and the context in which it was collected. As we have argued before in our order from the 3rd of January 2022, without knowing exact contents of the large-scale data sets, Europol may process data beyond its legal mandate or fail to report the sensitive data as required, posing compliance risks. in today's digital age, it's only natural that Europol increasingly encounters large complex of data sets. And this bulk data collection often come from diverse sources and may include vast amounts of personal information, some of which can be sensitive. Analyzing the category and categorizing every piece of the data within the large data sets is a monumental task. Sensitive information like political opinions may be deeply embedded, making it challenging to identify without extensive processing. And combing through these data sets can take years. During this time, fulfilling the reporting obligations as they are required by Europol regulation becomes practically difficult, if not impossible, leading to the potential over-retention of the data. And recognizing these challenges, the EU legislator wisely established an exceptional regime within the Europol regulation, especially with Articles 18A and 18.6a of the regulation. This regime allows Europol to process large data sets that cannot comply with the standard data processing requirements and due to the volume and complexity. The exceptional regime includes specific conditions and safeguards to prevent the misuse, such as stricter oversight, limited retention periods, and clear purposes for the data processing. In substance, it provides the legal framework for the handling bulk data while ensuring protection of fundamental rights. The second part of the focus areas are joint operational environments as another critical focus area for us. Traditionally, law enforcement agencies have operated within separate systems, communicating and sharing information through the effectively equivalent of exchanging emails to transfer the case information from one system to the other. And I can understand that the growing desire among the law enforcement agencies to move beyond this paradigm and collaborate more effectively by jointly processing the personal data shared in operational environments and recognizing...
Kérem ombudsman urat, hogy legyen figyelemmel a 10 perces időkeretre.
I kindly ask you to respect your time limit.
Enhanced collaboration, the EU co-legislators have taken the steps to enable joint operational environments through the new Article 22A of the Europol regulation. So let me then shorten the presentation and go to the practical conclusions of our actions. I would like to urge the group to support the measures that uphold robust data protection standards, even as we adapt to the new technological realities. I believe this includes endorsing the continuous separation of the big data sets from data where the data subject categorization is concluded, to ensure that where the police are cooperating ever more closely, there are strong oversight measures in place, and to keep clearly separate artificial intelligence supposed guesses on closest matches and use those only as the leads. And the ongoing dialogue between the EDPS, Europol, and the European and national parliament is, in my opinion, essential to ensure that there is a correct oversight over the cooperation of police forces and law enforcement forces in Europe. Thank you very much for the attention, and I'm ready to answer the questions on practical actions taken by the EDPS.
Köszönjük szépen Jevrovszki úrnak az előadását, most pedig
Thank you very much for your presentation. And now Mr. Drewer from the EDPS. Mr. Drewer, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the members of the European Parliament and members of the national parliaments to invite me for the second time now as a data protection officer to report to you, to the Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group. I prepared for you a very brief presentation. If it is possible to have it on the screen, that would be helpful. The Data Protection Office has the task to ensure in an independent manner lawfulness and compliance with the Europol regulation and its implementing rules. The DPO is a member of staff and an integral part of the organization. Being an internal assurance provider is essential. It facilitates the building of trust amongst Europol staff, ensures compliance from the inside, and enables the provision of advice or intervention at an early stage when potential risks for data subjects tend to be lower. As Data Protection Officer and head of the data protection function at Europol, I am accountable to the Management Board. My mission is to provide objective assurance on consultation, which is designed to add value and to improve Europol's data processing operations. In the performance of my duties, I am supported by the colleagues in the data protection function. In my presentation to you, I would like to cover the main activities undertaken by the Data Protection Officer. 2 slides further, please. In the context, in the Europol context, and it has been mentioned this morning already, we have the Europol's Data Protection Experts Network, better known as EDEN. During her keynote speech in September this year, the President of the Republic of Slovenia, Mrs. Nataša Pirc, stated, EDEN is not just a conference, but a network. It is a beacon for the data protection community, bringing together professionals, law enforcement officials, regulators, academics, and representatives from the private sector and NGOs. It is a gathering that reflects the diverse and interconnected world we live in, where the protection of personal data is no longer just a legal requirement, but a fundamental aspect of our shared values and a cornerstone of democracy. End of quote. In the context of EDEN, I would like to inform you we are also hosting the meetings of the Law Enforcement, the Data Protection Officers Working Group that provides national data protection officer colleagues a forum to cooperate. This is not only for the benefit of national law enforcement authorities, but also in the interest of Europol, as it is going to facilitate operational business in full compliance with data protection requirements. The EDEN conference is co-organized with the European Academy for Law. Journalists are always welcome to attend the EDEN conference, but there is the need to accredit beforehand as a journalist with the European Law Academy. Next slide, please. Continued awareness raising engages staff members and enables them to understand how important data protection compliance is, not only to maintain the trust of the data providers, but also of the citizens. As Data Protection Officer, I see added value to continue fostering the data protection culture within the organization by training staff members as well as external stakeholders. This includes monthly newcomers induction session, which anyone at Europol has to complete before they can be authorized for the processing of personal data under Europol's mandate. Throughout 2023, I provided data protection sessions for in total 351 newcomers at Europol. In addition, we run a guest officers training. The aim of the training is to provide a comprehensive overview of the main issues at stake concerning the processing of operational person data in the context of migration crisis and the hotspots. In 2023, 6 such training sessions were provided to guest officers deployed at hotspots across Europe. Furthermore, since March 2024, I contributed to a CPOL webinar together with the Fundamental Rights Agency on data protection and law enforcement and was requested to present Europol's data protection framework to delegations from Turkey and Ukraine. So to conclude on this point, there are various mandatory data protection trainings which have been all created building on EDPS cooperation, but also on input from other important stakeholders such as CPOL or the Fundamental Rights Agency. Next slide, please. As Data Protection Officer, I also serve as a contact point to the colleagues at the European Data Protection Supervisor that is responsible for the external data protection supervision of Europol. In addition, I serve as contact point to national data protection authorities who take enhanced interest in the work of Europol and coordinate their activities via the Coordinated Supervision Committee in the European Data Protection Board. For instance, the 2023 EDPS annual inspection also was accompanied by national data protection authorities, representatives of national data protection authorities, and 2024 saw an audit of the European Data Protection Supervisor in the context of Europol's medical service. Next slide, please. A DPO can never work alone. I'm participating not only in all meetings of the Europol Management Board and its working groups, I'm also attending the Security Committee and Europol's Artificial Intelligence Alignment Committee. I have regular meetings, in particular with all heads of departments of Europol's Operations Directorate, as well as with the deputy directors and with the executive director of Europol. My deputy is a member of Europol's Diversion and Inclusion Advisory Group. DPO interaction is crucial to ensure data protection compliance effectively. Next slide, please. Already last year, I reported to you that as DPO, I'm also involved in the ongoing implementation of Europol legal framework. An important element for the work of the data protection officer are certainly the implementary rules for the data protection officer, which will be adopted by the management board, taking into account the opinion of the EDPS. Next slide, please. In the operational domain, the data protection function is in regular touch with all Europol centers. Within the Operations Directorate, there is a dedicated unit serving as first line of defense. I'm grateful that our teams meet regularly to discuss how we can best ensure highest levels of data protection compliance. In addition, an important instrument are regular data protection function compliance checks that in 2023 and 2024 took place, and you see here an overview on this slide. Next slide, please. In the operational domain, I recently also advised the executive director in relation to exceptional transfers of personal data to third states. These transfers occurred in mid-September and mid-October in relation to imminent threats of committing acts of mass violence at places of religious worship. My analysis was that the interest of the suspects were unlikely to override the public interest in preventing imminent terrorist attacks. However, when transmitting the data, the personal data, to the third states, Europol followed my advice to request an undertaking from the recipient that any future actions resulting from the use of this data will consider and uphold fundamental rights and ensure a balanced approach. Next slide, please. The DPO workload remained high inter alia during the continuously growing number of prior consultation processes with the EDPS. You can see here in the overview the legal provisions regarding Article 39 was introduced in 2017 and further amended in 2022. Next slide. Europol is a forerunner regarding implementation of prior consultation mechanism against agencies in the area of EU justice and home affairs. There's no other EU agency that has done as many prior consultations as Europol. Next slide. Another operational area that I would briefly like to reflect upon is the one on artificial intelligence or AI and law enforcement. Balancing the benefits of AI-driven law enforcement with safeguarding individuals' privacy remains a central challenge for policymakers and society as a whole. Next slide, please. AI systems in law enforcement must be designed and implemented to uphold principles of transparency, explainability, a human-centric approach, trustworthiness, and full compliance with data protection laws. An early involvement of the data protection officer is crucial. Next slide, please. My last slides are related to a request of citizens towards Europol, the data subject access request. During 2023, Europol received a total of 469 data subject access requests. This represents a substantial increase from the years before. In line with the established practice, when there is no data about the citizens in Europol systems, the data protection officer informs the citizens accordingly and directly. Next slide, please. However, another striking figure is the actual numbers of times we actually process data of the citizens and the request on our systems. As you see on this slide, the number is constantly on the rise, in line with the growing amount of information Europol processes. Next slide, please. I had up to now the possibility to tell you about the data protection functions work in the area of operational data. We, of course, are also taking care of person data of the police officers and law enforcement officers working in The Hague at Europol. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I would like to inform you that the role of a data protection officer within a law enforcement organization like Europol is a demanding and highly specialized position. It requires a dedicated team of data protection experts who bring both commitment and exceptional qualifications to manage an ever-increasing workload. As Europol expands and takes on more complex responsibilities, including increasing processing of sensitive person data such as biometrics, the role of the data controller becomes even more critical in ensuring accountability. Last sentence from my side. This evolution brings a corresponding need for data protection resources to maintain high standards of privacy and data protection and demonstrate compliance. I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to present my report to you for the second time. Thank you.
Köszönjük Druer úrnak az
Thank you, Mr. Druer, for your presentation. And now, Mr. Borgersdijk is going to respond to the first previous presentations. You also have 10 minutes at your disposal before we turn to the JPSG delegates. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Executive Director, distinguished members of the JPSG, distinguished members of the National and the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm grateful for the opportunity on behalf of Europol to react to the previous speakers. We have an important role in making sure that the citizens are safe, but also that this happens in a way which is fully responsible from a human rights perspective and a data protection perspective. And for that we have built up a very healthy cooperation within the organization with the data protection officer and with the EDPS, and of course with the member states. Generally, you have heard already from previous speakers that we are in a huge transformation of policing, and this transformation puts especially Europol in a role where it is in the forefront of technical innovation, new developments, new forms of policing, new forms of cooperation with police services. And this urges us to look at data protection from a proactive, forward-looking perspective, taking into account the consequences that this may have on the policing, but also on the citizens. And for this we have established a respectful debate within the organizations where the various parts connect together almost on a daily basis to discuss data protection matters, how this will be implemented in the system, in processes, in guidelines, in everything, to make sure that this is fully in line with the expectations that you have from us. In that, the data protection officer and his data protection function are really, really important to facilitate this debate and to make sure that that happens. And we're actually very happy with the role that the DPO plays in this respect. The DPO has grown gradually over time, although it's not in line, not keeping pace with the increase of the workload of the DPO, but certainly it outpaces the overall development of the organization. The overall growth is less than that in the data protection function, which means that we dedicate quite some importance to that, the role of the DPO. Then also with the EDPS, we have established a very good relationship. We are frequently exchanging communication. We have regular meetings, more often now online than in person, and a really good established discussion. With the DPO and with the EDPS, we do not always agree, but we come to sensible solutions. That doesn't always happen in one day, but we work on that to make sure that we arrive there. On the points, the 3 points mentioned by the EDPS, the handling of large data sets. This is something that has our full attention, in the sense that large data sets, usually they are unstructured and you do not know in advance what is in there. Our basic rule that we have, if we suspect that there's any data which is not related to crime, so that it involves persons who are not either a victim, a witness, a contact, or a suspect, in those cases, by default, since we have a new legal framework, we process that either under 18.6a or under 18a. If we have assurance that from a data set, that we know enough of the data set, that we are certain that all of these individuals are related to crime directly. That can, for instance, be in the interception of a criminal network operating on darknet that are exchanging child abuse material. In that case, we know all of them are connected to that, and for that reason, we then qualify it as something that can immediately be processed under 18.2c for operational analysis. In other cases, for instance, when we receive a telephone from a suspect, on there can be huge quantities of information. There may be also data related to non-suspected persons. So these data sets we then treat under 18.6a. So we have this careful distinction. Then looking at a concrete example of what we have done in the past, the data set of Emma, which was the encrypted communication that was decrypted and used in support of quite a number of criminal investigations. I think here we should learn the lesson of the Commissioner, Ms. Johansson, who said we should not be naive. This data set, from what we have seen, the suspects operating in there have done the utmost to make sure they are unrecognizable, so it's not something where you can easily recognize an individual as being someone that we can then distinguish from the rest. Secondly, there are no others. There are no others, and just because of the reason of how you can qualify for getting such a license, this is for 600 euros for a quarter. This is not something that my children would buy from their pocket money. This is not something that a normal person would obtain. We are very careful, I assure you. We are very careful with the interception of large communication sets. And if there's journalists potentially in there, whatever, we treat it under 18.6a or 18a, depending on the case. In these exceptional cases where we are sure that it's only about criminals or persons directly related to the crimes, in those cases, exceptionally, we treat them directly under 18.2c, also because the normal pre-processing will not suffice to identify the suspects. The second point, the joint analysis. Also there we are very, very careful. This is a huge opportunity, and we see a major evolution that can develop over the next decades. However, at this stage, we're in a very early stage. We do not have a common practice for analysis. That means that the data handling in one country may differ from that in another country. For that reason, in this first instance, the current way that we're implementing this, Europol will be fully in charge. It will decide everything when it comes to the data processing, and the only role member states have is the opportunity to assess information and propose certain links. But every decision, every processing in that sense is controlled by Europol. How this develops in the future, hopefully we will have a common analysis practice in the future, so that in that sense we can extend it and potentially have a more extended role also for the member states. But at this stage, Europol is fully in control of the data processing. And then the last one, also there, a very cautious and careful approach to the use of artificial intelligence. It's tremendous what you can do with the automation of processing, with machine learning, all that, but you must at all times be certain of what it does. And it's not just that you must be aware of that when you buy a product, you also must make sure that your people working with it are conscious of how it works and what the consequences are. And certainly how these algorithms work to make sure that when you take the human decision, and this is something our director mentioned, the human decision is always still there to make sure that we are conscious of what the consequences are and take responsibility for these decisions. However, for that to be done in a responsible way, you need to understand what these algorithms do. And for that reason, the assessment of these processes and a careful approach for implementing and using AI is fully supported from our side. And this is also the way that we are preparing for the use of personal data for research and innovation, where you also have taken this careful approach to make sure that we first have everything elaborated in terms of processes, a sandbox ready for a protected environment, and based on that we will then continue and of course in good dialogue with the data protection officer and with the fundamental rights officer in this case and with the EDPS. That concludes my reaction to the previous speakers. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.
Burgersdijk úr, köszönjük az...
Thank you, Mr. Burgersdijk, for your presentation. Dear colleagues, we are going to move on to the discussion now. I kindly ask you to limit your contributions to 1 minute so that all colleagues have an opportunity to speak. The floor will be given alternately to members of national parliaments and members of the European Parliament. 2 to 1, 2 to 1, until we come to the end of the list. Once again, members are kindly invited to indicate clearly to whom they are addressing their question. And our guests are going to reply to each question individually in a ping-pong system. I am now inviting the first speaker, Fabrice Leggeri, who's a member of the European Parliament. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. This morning, the Director of Europol, Antall, told us we need a digital agenda on law enforcement. Now, in practice, everybody knows that Europol could be even more efficient in helping the states to fight against terrorists and organized crime if they had this kind of personnel. Are you prepared to envisage or authorize, first of all, exchanges of personal biometrical data between Frontex and Europol in both directions to fight against criminal networks and terrorists, and secondly, to provide or authorize the integration into European files of personal and biometric data collected against terrorists for allies who are not members of the EU.
Nem tudom, kinek címezte, de megadom a szót válaszadásra.
I am not sure to whom you have addressed your question, but you have the floor.
Well, my question was to, well, the gentlemen, they all discussed the personal data. Thank you.
Akkor mind a három úrnak megadom a szót, tessék parancsolni.
So I give the floor to all three of our guests.
So I will start as the European Data Protection Supervisor. I will only say that the European Data Protection Supervisor is not created in order to establish the policy of the European Union in the field of law enforcement. And this is the decision of the legislator, meaning both the Parliament and the Council, what is the role of the Europol as the agency. I don't think that at the moment the rules are prepared for all the actions that Mr. Leggeri said about, but as I said, from the EDPS point of view, we are prepared to deal with the changes in the law. However, these changes are of the political nature.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the question is quite an important one. If you look at the Europol regulation on the question of biometric personal data, it is very clear. Article 32 of the Europol regulation indicates that Europol may only process biometrics if it can be demonstrated that such processing operation is strictly necessary and proportionate. The EDPS previously already talked about the sensitivity of personal data as a particular category here. The upgrade of technical capabilities at Europol regarding biometrics is subject to an ongoing prior consultation with the EDPS. Another example are the opening orders determining the data that can be processed in analysis projects. So we have per analysis project strict necessity and proportionality conditions, and for biometrics processing, and it needs to be demonstrated in a free text field in the opening order. And so far is the Europol framework and the processes are very solid on this point. Together with the EDPS, we have further refined those justifications also per data subject category. It certainly makes a difference if you would like to process biometrics on suspects versus processing biometrics on victims, for instance. And that is the reason why we are very precise in this. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the EDPS for the good collaboration regarding this particular matter and for the concrete improvements that have been achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the to the extent that there is a legal basis for it, we have implemented detailed policies, procedures, and guidelines for people working with that information, and that pertains in particular for the exchange of such information. Mr. Ledgery, if I recalled well, also referred to the bidirectional exchange with Frontex. At present, this is possible from Europol to Frontex if strictly necessary. Concretely, at this stage, from Frontex to Europol, this is not possible, even though there is a legal basis for it. It requires first a new cooperation agreement to be concluded following Frontex having its new legal framework. And once that has been concluded, also the bilateral exchange can be implemented. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen, és mielőtt megadnám a...
Thank you. Before giving the floor to our next speaker, let me once again emphatically ask you to indicate to whom you are addressing your question. Our next speaker is Nikos Ketiros from Cyprus. You have the floor.
Καλημέρα σας. Ευχαριστούμε.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for all the information that you've provided. I would like to ask a question about cooperation that already exists, or perhaps doesn't, or to what extent it exists with third countries regarding this type of, for example, money laundering through building companies, virtual companies, the kind of virtual companies that also exist in the occupied part of my island. There are also other illegal actions, money laundering actions. So to what extent is there cooperation in this field? Thank you.
Képviselő is kihez címezte a kérdést?
And to whom are you addressing your question?
Σε όλους απευθύνεται, αλλά...
Well, to everybody, but perhaps also on a political level to Mr. Vorosky. Could the control perhaps give us some elements of information there?
Thank you. So first, Mr. Wierowski.
First of all, I would like to say that the part of these activities are the activities which are to be done inside the anti-money laundering scheme, which is right now under the change, and the anti-money laundering authority will be the one responsible for that. From the EDPS point of view, we've been always in favor of showing the precise effects of the actions. So in this field, anti-money laundering, we were allowing much more intrusion into the privacy than in the situations of PNR, for example, where this efficiency was not that easy to establish. There are the different transfer tools that exist for this transfers to the third countries, not only the general agreements that are right now under discussion, but first of all, the administrative agreements between the countries.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Europol has a solid framework regarding the exchange of personal data with third states. As you know, there is the possibility to exchange data on the basis of an adequacy decision on international agreements. But as the EDP has already highlighted, there's also a system of derogations that allow Europol in very specific, documented and justified cases to transfer personal data to a third state. In this regard, I would like to take the opportunity also to highlight that these derogations, of course, they're in detail described in the Europol regulation, but also technically implemented in Europol's information exchange tool Siena, where certain prohibitions for the transfer of personal data, if not certain conditions are fulfilled, are actually blocked by our exchange tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Personally, I'm not directly well informed about the exact cooperations that we have in terms of fight against money laundering. As mentioned before, we have a wide number of cooperation agreements with relevant countries. We have opportunities to work via financial intelligence units, often also on the base of these cooperation agreements, certainly where it concerns the exchange of operational personal data. And these are very instrumental for us to make sure that we combat and prevent this kind of money laundering. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm informing you that you can only address your question to one person, simply because we are pressed for time. So once again, I kindly ask you to indicate to whom you're addressing your question. Nikola Vinchev is our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The Commissioner designate Brunner has highlighted the importance of updating tools for digital information access and revising data retention rules with an emphasis on safeguarding fundamental rights. How do you think these tools could be developed and implemented while ensuring strong privacy protections? How will Europol support Member States in navigating this balance, especially in relation to new data retention rules to ensure that digital evidence remains usable and admissible in cross-border cases? And I'm addressing the question to Mr. Drewer. I think he's most suited to respond to it. Thank you.
Válaszadásra Drewer úrnak adom meg a szót, tessék.
Mr. Drewer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I understand the question is related to data retention in this regard. We at Europol, we had some years ago already expert workshops regarding the question of data retention, where we exactly looked at the question that was now raised by the colleague, where we are looking at the possibility to provide this balance between data protection and privacy on the other side and the need for law enforcement to have access to this data. We understand that now also with the statement that was mentioned, this will be again higher on the political agenda, and from the data protection officer side, we are more than happy to support any discussion that will develop out of this point. Thank you.
Köszönjük, most pedig felkérem Alexander.
And Alexander van Hattem from the Dutch Senate is our next speaker.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the Dutch delegation, we would like to ask about the extent to which the European Data Protection Officer, Mr. Wiewiórowski, paid attention to the working procedures of Europol. That was partly addressed earlier in the presentation, but more particularly, my question would be this. Mr. Wiewiórowski talked about the data minimalization efforts and collation of data. And in practice, this means that you can't really do much with the data. It's also been remarked that you have to be careful about the functioning of algorithms, how they work. And then, as we're talking about AI, how is the EDPS dealing with AI? How does he think he can cope with the tension between data minimalization on the one hand, and on the other hand, the almost limitless amount of data that can be processed by AI? Thank you.
Válaszadásra Druer úrnak adom meg.
Again, Mr. Druer.
Ombudsman úrnak. Ombudsman úr.
No, I correct myself. The Ombudsman has the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. That's, of course, $1 million question to say how we can balance the approach to the principles which are stated in the data protection law, especially the purpose of minimization, the principle of minimization and purpose limitation. These are the two that are under the biggest tension with the technologies like the AI. What we do at the moment is that we try to do it with the tools that were provided us by the law. And first of all, these are the prior consultations and the kind of sandboxes that we can create together with Europol. And the prior consultations are the most effective tool where we can look through the data protection impact assessment on how the data will be processed and how the algorithms work. Definitely the human oversight is here the main word to be taken into consideration. The data minimization is not in the total conflict with the idea of AI technologies. AI technologies also try to limit the resources that are used in order not to duplicate the resources which are wrong. So the work on that is the practical tool that we have to do together with the controllers, in this sense with Europol.
Köszönjük szépen, most pedig...
Thank you. Saskia Rickmont from the EP is our next speaker.
Thank you very much. My question is also related to the compliance with data protection when it comes to AI tools, sandbox environments, but I would ask you whether the Europol is on a good way to answer the recommendations of the EDPS on that matter. I also heard from the representative from Europol, and I want to make sure I understood well. How do you deal with data subject access requests when you're processing big data sets labeled as a whole as data containing data about suspects if you haven't identified those persons? I would like to understand better. Thank you.
Most akkor tényleg Druer úré a szó.
And indeed, this time it's for real, Mr. Druer, to answer the question.
Thank you very much. I will, my first answer is to the question on data subject access request. We have at Europol a procedure that has been consulted with the European Data Protection Supervisor, how we respond to data subject access requests and how we check our systems when a citizen request arrives at Europol. I can assure you here that considerable amount of resources are spent at Europol on each data subject access request that arrives at Europol in order to provide, as soon as possible, the data subject with an answer that is in line with the Europol regulation. And I think, if you allow me, Mr. Chair, to highlight this, it is particularly important because data subjects or citizens that asked Europol for access to their data are particularly concerned about processing of their personal data by law enforcement authorities. So it is therefore of utmost importance to have these requests answered on the decision of the executive director if there is actually the data processed by the citizen in our systems, and otherwise, if we check our databases according to the process established, together with the European Data Protection Supervisor, and we come to the conclusion, because of the checks that we make, that there's no data processed in our databases about the citizen, that then the citizen gets immediately an answer from Europol that no data is processed. I think that is also important for the citizen to execute its right. Regarding the question on sandbox environment, I'm not so sure whether this was also directed to me, but I'm happy to inform you that we have prior consultation processes with the EDPS ongoing in this regard, and I think we are making, with 3 pending prior consultation processes in this regard, considerable progress in this particular sensitive area. Thank you.
Köszönjük, és utolsó kérdés.
Thank you, and I now invite the last speaker, Christophe Berger. You have the floor.
Thank you. Dear chairs, dear members, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for providing us with detailed information and good discussion. I know that this topic was raised before, but I would like to ask about the exchange of information. We know that the law enforcement data travels via Europol between the different EU states. Therefore, I would like to ask, does Europol see major problems in the processing of exchanging the classified confidential information? And how does Europol ensure a safe exchange of that type of information? And I am addressing this question to Mr. Drewer. Thank you.
Köszönjük, Drewer úr, a szó.
Mr. Drewer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the question. So we are talking here about the confidentiality of Europol information, of law enforcement information, actually information Europol is entrusted by member states and third states. In the exchange of this information, and you will be not surprised that most of this information contains personal data. Indeed, there is the possibility that one of the member states or a third state decide that this information is classified. And we're talking about restricted, confidential, secret, and top secret. In this case, Europol has rules on confidentiality. These rules on confidentiality, they foresee a table of equivalence, and that ensures that within the European Union and the exchange of this classified information containing personal data via Europol, the security measures applied to this particular law enforcement information is respected throughout the life cycle of that information. And I think this is important because there we are talking about the area of confidentiality on the one side and of data protection on the other side. From my point of view, although I'm as a data protection officer mainly concerned as an assurance provider on data protection and privacy, I think the system of classification that is applied to law enforcement information and where Europol has certainly an actor role as information hub is working in the proper way. Classification helps to protect law enforcement information if it is necessary to be protected. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen.
Thank you very much. And with that, we have concluded the speakers list. We can close this item on the agenda. I would like to thank the JPSG delegates and I would especially thank Mr. Wiewiórowski, Mr. Dürer, and Mr. Bergersteig for your presentation, as well as your responses to JPSG delegates.
Ezt a programpontot toljuk át ebéd utánra, és azzal kezdünk, nem az ukrán témával, mert
Jó.
máskülönben nem lesz tolmácsolás, úgyhogy itt át kéne ugornod arra, hogy meghívod őket az ebédre.
Következő információt kap.
I have received the following information from the Secretariat. We were supposed to continue from 12:15 to 12:45 with fundamental rights protection on the agenda. This is going to be postponed to after lunch. With that, I can conclude this morning's session, and at the same time would like to warmly invite all registered participants to a lunch reception hosted by the European Parliament in the Spinelli building. So you have to go down to the 3rd floor in this building and then cross the bridge, the passerelle, to the Spinelli building, and then on that other building you have to go down to the ground floor. The European Parliament staff are here to assist you. I would also like to make one more announcement. The Hungary's EU presidency has held all meetings in the building of the National Assembly in a historic setting. This is the only one which is not held in Budapest at the usual venue. So we thought it would be fitting to share the beauties of our National Assembly, our Parliament, with a photo exhibition. The photo exhibition opening is going to be at 1:30 on the 2nd floor in the Spark building in the Yehudi Menuhin space. Please come along, take a look at the photo exhibition, and we are going to continue in the afternoon at 2:15 sharp. Thank you.